Dame DeNamur, did I say that right?
Notre Dame DeNamur
University?
Yes. Yes.
Great. And so right here's a slide that you all will get after the presentation. It just has some contact information and some email addresses. But before we get started, to the doctors, Therese and Tish, do you want to say a little bit more about yourselves and your program, and then we'll go back into the slides and get going.
Okay, Tish and I have both been working at Notre Dame for 4 or 5 years, and we work in the evening intensive program. So we work with adults who are over the age of 25, who have professional experience, and who have completed some undergraduate work already. Ours is a degree completion program. So they work on primarily their upper division work with us. And in the time we've worked with all of our students, become extremely passionate about who they are and what they bring both to the classroom and then to the world.
I'm always interested and start most of my classes by asking people where they are in their lives now, both business folks and management as well as human services, and find out that they're right in the middle of somebody dropping them in the pool. And they're also really excited about learning. And they have 3 children, all throwing up at the age of 3, a husband and or a wife, and a job as well. So a part of what we'll be talking about today is how to set the stage, both out of the classroom and in the classroom, so that the people that are there with all the things they have going on can actually be there and know that we know that there's a lot of other there out there.
And what we'll be talking about is today is primarily the classroom and some of the implications of working with adult learners. And then next week we'll be expanding that and talking about creating a university culture that embraces adult learners so that they can, because they are the new majority on the college classrooms and college campuses across the United States, to really maximize the benefit of the education for them.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's a good introduction and a great kind of purpose and segue for just kind of jumping in and getting into our session. So it's about 2:09 now. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys to start your presentation. So are you guys all set and ready?
We're ready.
All right. So whenever you guys get the screen share, you can go ahead and we'll get started. And then for those of you out there that have not gone to the chat room yet, just go to tinyurl.com/SteveKatie-webinar. The link's in the chat, and join us in there, because there are a couple times where we'll be asking you to provide your experience and your feedback.
Are you ready for us to start, John?
Yep, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay. We wanted to start with an introduction and explain the title. So why the 52%? And we've been doing a lot of research and actually found a lot of competing numbers on this. But we chose the 52% because that represents one consensus about what non-traditional, so-called non-traditional learners are clearly the majority and the new norm among undergraduate students in the United States. And there was a great statement in The Atlantic earlier this year. And they actually quote a much higher number. And they say that as many as 73% of U.S. students enrolled in a degree program today are described as what we used to call non-traditional. And their quote goes on to say they're not bright-eyed co-eds fresh from high school, but rather adults who are financially independent, working to support themselves, and often a child or relative as well. The students play many roles, some of which inevitably take precedence over their education, which is why most of them attend school part-time. So that is our focus, is the students who are coming back part-time to finish their degrees. Now, why is this relevant? The sheer numbers on campus, I think, is enough to make the number relevant. But what makes us passionate about them is that this, I think, represents an evolution and a revolution in education. And I think if you watch the media and you see what's going on in the news, you'll see that the value of a college degree is being questioned by a lot of people. The WASC, our accrediting agency, asks us to answer that question: what is the value of the degree? If you look in the news, there's an entrepreneur who's offered scholarships for people not to go to college. We saw that on NPR recently. And the driving philosophies behind this challenge, I think, are good for us as educators. They're the idea of owning and self-directed learning, the availability of learning online, and that the ones that, especially the ones that don't require a high price tag that higher education can come with, and the need for practical experience. And what we're going to talk about today and in our next session are the many ways that we think that these so-called non-traditional programs appropriate these philosophies, that they create learning environments for students in which they are expected to own their outcomes, find relevance in what they're doing, and engage in meaningful ways that are often individually defined. So that's part of why we're passionate about it, and hopefully we'll discuss that throughout the session, and you'll hear our passion. But this next title is called Higher Education's Ignored Students, and that was also from another article that came across more recently in the Atlantic, and its premise is that colleges are failing their biggest group of students. And according to the research, it's because they lack the structure and culture to support adult students. But really, I think, and we'll talk about that today too, but it goes beyond the logistics. Because even once the building blocks are in place, you've got an evening program or a weekend program, institutions need to change the way they speak about adult students, how they advertise and market for them, how they communicate with them. And so our presentation today is going to address some of those things. And we'll talk about who these students really are. From a policy perspective, too, it's always relevant. We read a statistic that said by 2018, 2/3 of the jobs are going to require a post-secondary credential. So these headline news about challenging the value of a degree isn't going to be relevant, according to a lot of research, for most students, because we want to build the skills of those who are out there. A lot of times, the approach to adult learners is addressed as a deficit. When we read that Atlantic article, the author who wrote it was a non-traditional student who said that she graduated 7 years late. That very perspective that she's late, I think, is wrong. Our students aren't late. Our students are doing things in a different order. And as you'll see as we talk about them and some of the examples we'll give, they are people who we think of as people who were far too interesting to go to college at a different age. They were entrepreneurs. They started families. They ran businesses. They found other ways to seek education, and now they're coming back to enhance what they already have. So they're not late. They're doing things differently, and that's what sort of the foundation of what we're talking about today.
So let's think about just a moment some ways that we can impact these unique types of learners. As Therese said, many people think of the learners as late, and I have to say that my experience is a lot of the learners that come to my classrooms, and I think probably Therese's too, have begun thinking or continued thinking of themselves as starting, stopped, attended, re-entered, here we are again, stepping up. And even though they're not necessarily late from an esoteric point of view, they do have less confidence and they do have more life commitments. And they start classes after a full day of work, which is a challenge and really, really causes high commitment to coffee and diet drinks with caffeine. So we're all, running up and down the halls to make sure we get exactly what we need to keep our eyes open and be fresh. So given that, here's some suggestions and tools. I'm noticing, based on the questions that were asked about who's listening, that everyone, or nearly everyone, is a teacher, and you have chosen the mission of working with adult learners. It's unique from my point of view, as I spent the majority of my youngest teaching life working with elementary and secondary and senior high students, and found them to be quite different from the people that I'm working with now. And let me tell you how happy I truly am. Boy, adult learners are re-entering college and redefining who they are or who they could be. And so I see it from my vantage point that it's my job to help hook them, take what they know and what they've already learned, and tack that on to some of the new things and new ideas that they have or might not have already had that I'm wanting them to take in. So this is sort of a stickability kind of thing. How do we take what they have learned and already know and add some other ideas that may negate or support what they have held on to all that time? So I think my major issue is taking what I can give them and helping them retain that, especially what they need to know, and discard what they don't need to know. So the first approach for the unique 52% is using student differences to engage the class in tolerance building. This is a big deal for me, and I'm sure it is for most of you. I am constantly excited about the fact that I look around the room of 20 or 30 people, and I see, well, maybe even 15. I see at least 2 or 3 generations, at least 3 or 4 ethnic backgrounds, and a depth of commitment that spans lots of years to their culture, their religious values, belief systems, and have a lot of prejudgments, just like we always all have. And so I bring to the classroom an invitation to think about what they already know and look at how that enhances or takes away from what they have brought to the classroom. I'm really excited. I might be the only one, but I'm really excited about assigning writing and holding discussions that allow people to disagree with one another and learn how to disagree with one another and take in others' beliefs. Now, active listening is not exactly, a unique point of view or a unique skill, nor is thoughtful and respectful questioning. But I see it as my job to model that so that they can watch people and listen to people and participate themselves in knowing what it's like to struggle and to understand another person. I got so excited I forwarded the wrong darn thing. There we go. And struggle with each other and other ideas and come out with something that they can see that's common in both of them, even though they disagree. So we'll talk more about that later. Yes?
I was going to say, we are in the San Francisco Bay Area. So when we have students in classes, most of them are from the same area, and most of them say, oh, I know all about differences. I'm from San Francisco. I'm from the Bay Area. I value differences. So it's fantastic to be in a classroom and challenge that, because there are people who do on the surface value differences, and yet it's a chance to say, but where do you have some problems with it, and how do you deal with conflict? Do you think of any examples of students who have come up with examples?
Well, I'm getting ready to talk about one where we have a class in cultural diversity, and a man came out in front of the whole group and said, I have not told anybody this, but I am gay, I'm bisexual. And the entire room came to a stunned halt, and one person said, are you telling us that because you really believe it's right? And he said, yes. And I said, well, why don't you tell us why you think it's right, Gary? And then I said, you know, Joseph or whoever, why don't you tell us what you think is, quote, wrong or confusing or concerning for you? And we began having a discussion about that. And we didn't come to any conclusion, but we were able to sit in the same room and deal with those differences. And it stayed with us the whole time. And I felt really excited about that conversation. Yeah.
I was thinking of other examples too, students who have told us about their illegal immigration experiences or their status as not being documented, which is, you know, controversial and interesting. And but the story that comes to mind most is a student who was, you know, one of those difficult students in class, one who challenges the teacher. The other students roll their eyes a little bit. And she started talking about her background and where she'd come from. And I think the whole class was really floored because knowing where she had been, the poverty and abuse she'd grown up with, and then who she had chosen to become, gave such a greater depth of respect to who she had become, even though she was still a little rough around the edges.
Good. You don't exactly get to this kind of opportunity when you're in a conversation with a group of people that you share common beliefs with. So that's what I think the beauty of helping set up a chance to engage in differences and give people the tolerance for that. Many of us, including me, who was from the South and had a mother that, you know, nearly had a heart attack when I said no, and I was, you know, like just said no to a Coca-Cola. I mean, it's like, whoa. So it's been a learning for me as well. I certainly didn't learn it in my school. I said yes to teachers, and that was it. And so that's another thing we'll talk about later. The approach that I chose as the second one, and that we talked about, Therese and I, quite a bit, is using self-directed learning. With adults, there is a real need, I believe, to support their want for us to give them guidance, but push them out into the world fairly quickly to start looking for ways that they can find resources and experts and guides to help them with research and learning and help them make connections in the local or regional community. So the questions I would like for them to ask themselves is, what's going on out there? What's really happening in that world that I don't know anything about? I know my world, but not that world out there. Oh, in the community 3 towns over, they're doing this and this and this, and I had no idea. And then also to have people come back and say, I talked with X person who has created a mediation center that serves 400 people, and she gets $500 a year from the state. Can you believe what she's done? And then everybody explodes, and that's, you know, look what people can do. Look what's there. Look how creative. It's very exciting for people to come back with this, you know, just explosive excitement about one person doing so much to make such a difference.
I think it inspires them to realize their own potential, which has already been, you know, manifested in career and family and community success. But it's by seeing what others do and being in community doing that inspires them to do even more.
Yeah, I mean, what's possible out there? It's very exciting. And the second part of this is primarily just inviting them to begin taking more and more responsibility. And we'll talk about that later. We see that adults do take the responsibility for learning really seriously as adults, more than people that were younger. And we want to continue encouraging that taking of total responsibility by requiring them to reach out into the community. So I guess one of the things I was wondering, since this is learning for all of us, is what other advantages does self-directed learning have in your experience for adult learners? Can you think of other advantages that you have noticed as you've allowed or asked your students to reach out without you right behind them?
Good question. So let's give people a couple minutes to answer. And I got a question in here that some of you might be having trouble hearing. Can you raise your hand if you can hear us okay? So if you are hearing us okay, if you can raise your hand. Okay. Okay, so everyone is hearing us okay. So in the chat room, either at the www.tinyurl.com/Steve Katie webinar chat room, or in the chat room or questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel, what are some other advantages of self-directed learning for adult learners in your experience? And I would also nudge folks that are out there, what are some other techniques that you may have used to engage differences in folks when we're dealing with adult learners? What are some techniques that you guys may have used? So let's go ahead and get those in the chat room, and I will be listening to bring those out. And then Therese and Tish, why don't you keep going, and then as people's answers start coming in, I will bring them in.
Okay, great, good.
I'll continue with approach number 3, which is set expectations up front. Now, this is one that Therese and I don't have exactly the same
discussion about.
We did. We didn't duke it out, but we were thinking about it. Well, I was thinking about it. I don't know about her. I think we have different styles, she and I think the different styles of teaching and who we are as human beings determines a lot of how we reach out to students or help them feel comfortable or whatever. But one of the things I always do is ask the students what's important to them, especially if they are coming in new and they feel failed and quit school. I notice they're uncomfortable. They don't know whether they can go to the bathroom or not. They don't know whether they are supposed to raise their hands. Can they use the computer to look for a new fox coat? What are the rules that the classroom is going to be structured around? What is the context? What's in and what's out in the classroom? So early on, I suggest that the students set their own ground rules, and I just, make notes on a piece of flip chart paper, and then I ask them, okay, here are some. You might not like all of them. Which ones would you not be willing to agree to? That gives them a chance to opt out, or for us to have a conversation where we're pushing back and forth, or two people are pushing back and forth about a particular ground rule. A lot of time the ground rules have to do with it being on time, one conversation at a time, don't interrupt. Some people say don't argue, positivity 100%, and then I step in and say, and what would we do if we had a disagreement? And so that gives us a chance to talk about that. Okay, so later on, I'm going to talk about how I also get feedback from our students about my teaching, but I think you had something to say, Therese. And did you notice that I went right past her? Because she's agreeing with me. No,
she's grabbing me and holding my arm down. We can model our disagreement, because when I looked at this, I thought, well, I tend to teach students who are not brand new. Tish has more of the brand new classes. And so when she presented her argument, I certainly did not disagree with it. What I tend to find, though, is that if I'm in a classroom and someone told me to turn off my cell phone, I would think, I'm paying to be here. I'll leave it on if I want to. I'm not going to compromise my learning in any particular way, because I would automatically silence my cell phone but leave it out because I have young children, and if I needed to, if in case of emergency, I would expect an instructor to have the courtesy to respect me, and I've done that with the students, and I know Tish does too. And so I have because I don't like to be told what to do. I assume students don't want to be told what to do because I'm self-motivated learner. I assume they're self-motivated learner, and through slightly different approaches, we get the same outcomes from our students because we treat them like adults who are self-motivated learners who want to be here.
Yeah, exactly. And
she's not holding me down anymore.
I'm not holding her down, no, but I'm going to change the slide in about 27 seconds. But no, I would say add that the students are the ones that put the ground rules together.
Absolutely.
So it's not me. I might say I'd like to put one conversation at a time, I'll add that. But most of the time, it's not me putting it together. So that makes it a little easier for everybody. I do have people that say, I'm glad to know what's in, what's out. And that makes me feel good. And I post it for 2 or 3 sessions, and then they say, don't put it up anymore. We can recite them. And we just go forward.
And just this week, I had a student who was in one of Tish's classes come to me and express concern because she wasn't sure if she'd be allowed to go to the bathroom. And I never would have thought that was a concern. And I said, of course your instructor will let you go to the bathroom. Don't worry. So you never know. And I think it raises a good point about letting them set expectations, but clarifying what they are.
I never thought about saying, should we put one down about going to the bathroom? But maybe in the future I will. The fourth approach is to be aware and sensitive to student differences in the skill of using technology. And this is hilarious because, I can barely type my name.
Oh, that's not true.
I know it's not, but, I'm sensitive to this as well. And I have students, a lot of students that are very alarmed by thinking they're going to have to do anything but stand up. If they're going to have to do PowerPoint, or they're going to have to use, excuse me, some sort of other way of expressing their views, and it is going to require technology, and they have no idea how in the world they're going to learn it. I give them ideas about where to go on and off campus. Guess what? They're working all day, and they're coming to school at night, and meanwhile they have children.
And on the other hand, we have students who work for Facebook. We have students who work for some of the Silicon Valley companies, who work for Google, who know more about computers than I'll ever learn, who present their papers in ebook format. They're really so the differences in technological capacities in the classroom are vast, and Tish has some fantastic ways of bridging those.
Well, one of the things that I do is let's see. I wonder if I'm on the right page there. Well, let's just go there. Don't read it, just listen. One of the things I do is when I assign the first paper that is going to have a presentation that goes along with it, I say, if you are skilled in technology and in PowerPoint and so forth, would you pair up with someone who doesn't have that skill? And then you all can figure out how to balance out the workload so that it's equal. But one of the things it would be good, if you want to, is to have a person who needs to learn actually watch what's going on with the person that's really good at it. And that usually helps some. And in the end, what happens is the learner and the teacher, student teacher, generally get together in between, and I offer them extra credit if they want to, and they actually transfer learning so that the people that don't know how to do the technology they'll need to actually get trained in the class, and once the learner can demonstrate to us in the class that they've conquered, quote unquote, the technology, both the teacher and the learner get credit for exchanging that kind of information and that training.
I think that's such a great idea.
It's fun. I saw it happen last week, and just one person said, I can't believe I'm going to learn this in my first class. And I'll have it for the rest of the time I'm here and beyond. So it confirmed for me, and then everybody else liked the extra credit thing, and then, of course, they all wanted extra credit for sitting there. I don't know. But at any rate, it was a really exciting step for some people and others as well. So, sharing consistently feedback on performance. Now, I know you all always give feedback on performance, and this I think is a little on the odd side perhaps, but for me, this is more of the issue about letting people know when they're on target so they feel good about it, especially those that haven't been in the classroom a lot. And also with things like, that makes sense, yeah, I can see where you're going, that sounds right, providing incentive for them to continue, and given more challenging feedback, like, I'm not clear where you're going with that. Can you say more? Here's what I think. What part of that don't you agree with? And how does that pair up with what I heard on the other side of the room? It seems like a lot of opposite points of view here. And again, pointing out, giving feedback from a view of letting them know when they're on and off, and then helping them come together and look for something that's common to both of their points of view. One of the things that I've done that I really like is when two students get into a bit of a struggle about a particular issue, and they can't get out of it, bless their hearts, and I can't figure out how to get them out of it. I ask person A to take person B's point of view and reflect it. And then I ask person B to take person A's point of view and have them have a disagreement or a conversation articulating the other person's point of view. Really, but short of having a heart attack, it's just about the hardest thing to do. I've heard people say, I won't do it. But the point is helping people open to, to differences, and have them, feel like they're expanding themselves as opposed to holding on to something, good, bad, or indifferent, that they've always held on to.
And the key to that is that as adult learners, they are perhaps embedded in their own perspective, but also, it's important to challenge different perspectives. And I think we both strongly believe that we're not going to find better solutions for all the many problems that confront the world unless you learn to think about things a little bit differently. And so getting students to do this, I've seen this with ethical issues in classrooms, and I've never seen an assignment that challenges students as much as taking the opposite perspective on a social issue they feel strongly about. But when they do, when there's real conversation about it, the vast majority of the solutions lie in what's common ground. And that understanding, when students have that, is enormously empowering.
And creates the creativity, or brings that out where it might not have been before, when it was just one side or the other. Great. The last thing I just put here, as we talked about, Therese and I talked about giving feedback, was just the importance of getting feedback from students. So as you scan this, you'll see that one of the things I do is when class doesn't go very well and I can't quite figure out what's going on, I end about 5 or 10 minutes early and say something like, let's take a look at what worked and what didn't work today. And I divided a piece of flip chart paper, worked, didn't work, and then I asked them to tell me what they saw that really made their class go well, and what they saw that didn't, including some things that I might have done and other things that others could have done, not necessarily nailing them to the wall, but getting some idea of what didn't work and having them evaluate that in a big boy way or a big girl, in an adult way. And then if we have time, I ask them for some, front of mind solutions, so that they have some sense of not just giving you things that didn't work, but things that could be done the next time.
And what's awesome about that is it reminds students that they are self-directed learners and that we respect that. And so if something went wrong, it's not the instructor's problem. it's a mutual problem.
It's our problem.
Yeah, how can we solve this together? Because if you ask somebody for their feedback, they'll feel better about the outcomes, number one, but there's more buy-in into the outcomes, and that reminds the students as to what is really the foundational principles of a program like this, which is to respect people where they are and help them to be who they want to be.
Yeah, I think that's a great technique, and it does really well. I've done that in my classes before, kind of a debrief on just a day or a debrief on the lesson, gets them involved, makes them feel like they're a part of the discussion. I have a question. How would this differ, or how does this differ from maybe a traditional student or from a student who is not an adult, under the age of 24? How would you change the feedback? How is this piece tailored to the adult learner?
So let me just check to make sure I understand what you're asking. Why is this just for the adult learner?
Yeah, why is this feedback, consistently given feedback, why would this be a technique for the adult learner that would be different from a non-adult learner?
Well, when I worked with folks that were not adult learners, when I was working in lower grades and before they got their degree, this kind of thing was preceded by a long conversation about who owns your education, what makes things work in class, and what can you do about it. What responsibility do you have to give me feedback? How is that equal or not to my responsibility to give you feedback? So I have done this with young adults, but I have spent more time setting the whole scene up so they understood, because most young adults don't really see this as a parent-child kind of relationship. Education, and they see that. I mean, I don't know whether you all have ever trained young adults, but they sit back and say, like, I mean, they don't say it, but it looks to me like, okay, entertain me, or oh, okay, if that's what you want, okay, so there's an idea of who owns it. So I do a lot of that drop stuff before I use it in a younger setting. But it can be used both at both levels, or any level, best I can tell.
Okay. And we have a couple things. We have a couple things out in the chat room. But did you want to go ahead and answer too, and then we'll bring in some stuff from the chat room?
Yeah, I want to talk faster. That's my goal in life at this point in time, and that's probably hard to believe. So I wanted to talk basically. Yes, so what I want to do is hit the high points of a couple of other things, and then we can do what the folks in the audience are asking. And then we have some additional examples that are, I think, really rich that I'd like for us to be able to get to. So I'll hit the high points, and then we'll move on from there. How's that sound?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, good. Okay, so the next thing is for us to remember the particular concerns returning adult learners have, and that has to do with the whole idea of, am I going to be respected? Am I going to be treated as an adult? If they've stumbled a lot, they have needs that need to be addressed. Is this going to really work for me? How is this going to work for me? I usually ask them in the beginning, what are your goals, educational goals as well as job goals, and after that I say, you need to ask yourself the question, why are you in this class? And what is it that ties you to this class that's going to serve you in this class? And make them think about that like it's their responsibility to figure it out. And I find that that's a lot, stimulates a lot of thought about where and when they need to see what's going on here, and not just go to an advisor and the advisor says, go take communications, and they say, okay, here I am, entertain me. And I want to move forward just a bit more. I keep wanting to move forward, but what the heck? There we go. This next to last one really speaks to managing time in a loose, tight way. And the major point here is that adult learners, at least my experience, is they want more control over the pace of what they do. And so a lot of times I say, shall we move on? What questions are left? Have I beat this one to death? Those kinds of things, because I feel like that they are responsible for letting me know, based on also what I can see, when we have done what we need to do on that particular subject. So I intervene when we get off track a lot, because the students appreciate it and they'd rather not tell somebody to be quiet. But I do try to also connect opinions and ideas that people have together so that they can see where we're going and can feel like a particular conversation is complete. Finally, we talked about this. Assume that the students have appropriated their education. Taking ownership. As I said, young students may think they're doing us a favor as teachers. And I suggest clarifying this is a big one for me, clarifying for yourself that wanting to help and support is one thing. Responsibility for the quality of the work and the attention that they give is theirs alone. And I find that difficult for me because I want to help, and I might be helping more than I need to. And I need to continue remembering that they own the education, and I'm there to support and help them and provide them with information they might not ordinarily have. So I'm going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to give, I think we have a couple of questions. So let's hear those, and then we can move on to our next piece, which is examples.
Great. And these aren't really questions more so than they're just kind of reactions to some of the principles from your presentation. So Barbara says that she has her students collaborate on classwork together, and she says that they discover strengths that they didn't know they had and really appreciate it. She also agrees with the tech divide sometimes for the students and how they come in different places with different skill sets and technology. And one technique that she uses to kind of relate to the adult learner is she was in their position as she was finishing up her undergrad and graduate degree. So she brings that into the discussion and respects them for the responsibilities that they do carry for being adult learners. And once she sets that and lets them know that she's done that for her career, they understand that they can do it too. And then Elsa said that she truly appreciates hearing her professors stating that they've been there. She says that provides emotional support for her, and she feels that that's needed in doing academic learning, is knowing that the teachers are there to provide not only an instructive but also a supporting role in understanding that they've been there as well.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, and knowing that knowing that we've been in some of the same places, you know, that we've been juggling work and family and the challenges of being in school while nursing, or I have students who get pregnant and come, and I'll share my experiences of being pregnant and being in school and the difficulties of the juggles and the things that you had to juggle. And I think that's it really helps me understand where students are coming from to have had some of those experiences myself.
Yeah,
absolutely. Therese, can you give us some examples of what's been going on in your neck of the woods?
Okay, we have some examples here, and this is really our chance to tell you why we're passionate about this, because you could buy a book on the theory behind adult learning and read it all, and that's fantastic, but there's more than theory. It's the students that we're passionate about. And so one of the ways that we found that really captures who they are, two ways. One is the narrative assessments that they do. So I'm just going to flip over to that for a moment and show you those. We get our student assessments. We actually ask them to do a narrative reflection on whether they feel like they've met the learning outcomes for the program, and to do a reflection on each of the core classes that they've taken. So I've just flipped to a screen that shows some of the student feedback, and this helps us, grounds us in how they feel about the program, because we look at the students who come in, and in many cases, like I said at the beginning, they epitomize, they're the model of people that, why do they need college? They've got a career, they've got a family, they're active in the community. It's unfinished business, yes, but someone arguing against college could take the position that they're already incredibly successful, and many of them are. But we take them where they are, and accessibility means meeting each individual student where they are and creating opportunities to grow where they want to grow. And this is what we get from our students as feedback. That's, you can see here, I'm an all-around better version of myself because of this program. The courses have helped me become more of a professional and a manager. That's the goal of many of our faculty, is to make people immediately more effective at work the next day. Not theory about how you might handle this if it ever happens in a job in the next 10 or 20 years, but to be more immediately effective the next day. Someone said, being in this program has engaged my life as an individual and a student as an employee. It has helped me gain better understanding of others. So they go on, but these are just some of the recent comments from our students, and they mean a lot because as adults they're appropriating their learning, they're motivated to be there, and in some ways it's quite challenging to look at the diversity of skills, backgrounds, and interests, meet them where they are, and create relevance for such unique individuals. The other thing that we do is e-portfolios. And so at the end of the program, students go through and they actually create a portfolio that helps assess not just who they are in terms of their academic background, but also who they are in terms of their careers, their family, their community lives. And I encourage them to engage in some reflection about the story of who they are and tell it in a way that's relevant to them. So what we get are really fabulously unique examples of who they really are. So one example is here. This is a student, David, who focused a lot on his career. And he gave fabulous examples of everything he'd done. He talked about his career as a father, this gorgeous picture of his twins. He gave examples of times he was on the news and the radio because he works for Job Corps. And he talked about what his job meant to him in relation to the learning. So this helps us to understand really who our students are, but also then how the learning that they've achieved in this program has been relevant to them. Some students go for more of a personal story. So this is a story of a student who gave us a very personal story. And Tish talked earlier about having a student come out in class, and during the portfolio presentation, the students do some of them opt to tell their stories in very personal ways. So this is Danae, and she talked about really feeling lost until she came back to school. She had a job, she had a baby, she didn't feel like she had any direction though. And so this program, this opportunity to expand who she was, as awesome as she already was, meant a lot to her because it did everything a college education is supposed to do and help expand those horizons. Another example is the lovely Mona, who gave fabulous examples, and she really focused a lot on her classes and gave examples in each of the core classes about not only a narrative assessment of what she learned, but then gave examples that provided some evidence of that learning. And finally, and we have a lot of these, but this is Rashida's portfolio, and I could talk about these students all day. She reflected on the hallmarks, and so that's really important to us as a university that's grounded in social justice and community engagement, is that we have the hallmarks that are basically sort of a vision statement, and they ground us in how we relate to our students and how our students project their talents out to the world. So she had just because she chose to, a lot of fabulous pictures from her travels, and then she went through here and reflected on each of the hallmarks and what they meant to her. So these are some quick examples of some of the evidence that our students give us that what we've talked about in terms of teaching in the classroom then manifests in ways that are really relevant to the students. And it's also an example of why we just love being with them, because I've never walked into a classroom and not left 4 hours later having learned a lot from the students. And every day I feel honored to know them. And I'll tell a story, a very quick story before we wrap up about Tish. And the first time she came to hear our seniors presenting some of this, and she called me the next day and said, I'm in the right place. I love this. Because the students we work with are so inspiring, and it makes us really passionate about the accessibility of undergraduate education to adults and making programs work in ways that work for them and really manifest the greatness of who they are. So in concluding this, our part one, we talked about faculty and how important they are to creating the student teaching experience. We talked about embracing the wholeness of who the students are and how that requires a different perspective about the relationship between the institution and the student. And next time we're going to have fun. I get really excited about creating this culture for students. So we'll talk about advising and building community. We've had some fits and starts, some success and some failures with all kinds of different community building activities, including social media. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. We got lots to do.
Yeah.
So back to you. Where are we, and how do we proceed?
Great. Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much, Dr. Madden and Dr. Davis-Wick, for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and bring up our last slide. In the meantime, if you could go into the chat room for our participants, if you can go into the chat room, either on the GoToWebinar control panel or go into our chat seat, go ahead and give some last-minute reflections that you have, some final either feedback or questions that you might have for our presenters. And then you guys should see my slide right now. Our next session is on September 25th at 2 p.m. Any questions or reflections, bring them into the chat room, or some reactions or insights as you're leaving. So we can share them before we go. The recording and the materials for today's session will be sent from GoToWebinar. It'll be a link to a Google folder that you can open. And Dr. Madden and Dr. Davis-Wick, just send me your slides so we can get those out.
Okay.
So let me see. So we have Julia O'Mara came in and said that she thought that this started at noon Pacific, and that is not true. It started at 11 Pacific, and so next week, please join us, and we'll be. And since you are registered, you will get a copy of the video and the slides. So we are glad that you came in. Elsa said that the approaches that you guys presented truly made you feel as if she made the right choice to go back to school as an adult. Just to know that you guys are being supported, and that she's being supported in so many different ways, and trying to be creative and supporting us really means a lot to her as a student.
That's great.
That made my day.
So I think that is it. With that, thank you all very much for joining us. Again, for our Scholar Perspectives webinar series, thank you very much, Drs. Madden and Davis-Wick, for your time, too. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
All right, and with that, thanks, everybody, and we will see you next Thursday at 2 p. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific.